My name is Hsco, and this is my interpersonal communication project for Human Services Counseling 508. Next slide, please. Here's just an overview on what we're going to be discussing today. We have my overarching goal, what my personality is, some backgrounds and behaviors that I have, different potential barriers, and solutions and actions to achieving my overarching goal. The main purpose of this presentation is for me basically to have come up with what my overarching goal is throughout this course when we have done lots of journaling and reading on talking and listening effectively. And in order to determine what my overarching goal is, we're going to need to first look at what my personality is. Next slide, please. In this course, we start off by taking the Uniquely You assessment, which told you what your personality was. Mine was labeled a D, I, and a C. However, when I'm around other people, I'm expected to be an I and a D. So for starters, let me explain. D is being an active task-oriented person by directing, driving, demanding, dominating, determining, decisive, and doing. And I is being active, people-oriented person by inspiring, influencing, inducing, impressing, being interactive, and being interested in people. While C is a more passive, task-oriented approach. You're more cautious, competent, calculating, compelling, compliant, careful, and contemplative. So after I took this test, I then read a book that Dr. Carbonell wrote that explained what these different personalities mean and how it makes me interact with others around me. This was very important for me to understand in order to come up with my overarching goal, because how you talk and communicate with others around you is in turn also how people will talk back to you and how comfortable they are discussing different issues they may have with you. Next slide, please. So what has basically influenced my background and what has influenced my current behavior and my personality is my background and my behavior growing up. Throughout my life, I've always been pretty outgoing. I've always been extroverted from the time I could start walking. I have never had a shy bone in my body. And I attribute this to the fact that my dad was a football coach growing up. I played many different sports throughout school, and I was a team captain for many of those different sports. And then after that, I attended the United States Air Force Academy, and I am now currently an officer in the United States Air Force. So growing up, it was a little bit different for me than a lot of kids at a young age. Since my dad was a football coach, my parents were also directors of the resident hall for the community college where my father worked, meaning I was around a lot of kids in their 20s to 30s, which made me more mature than your average 5-year-old usually is, since I learned how to speak and articulate with bigger words just by default from being around older kids. And as I continue to get older, something that my dad always instilled in me, him being a coach and all, was that you listen to your coaches. You don't question, you do what they say. And while this is a form of listening, it is not necessarily the type of listening that we have learned in this course, because you can listen and do something without really internalizing or understanding the task or what is going on around you. So this is definitely something that works in sports and even works in the military a lot of times, and works on the battlefield when there's not necessarily time for a lot of questions to be asked. But it didn't necessarily teach me the true meaning of listening growing up. And once again, when I attended the Air Force Academy, went through basic cadet training where you are taught that you once again do not really question. You say yes sir, no sir, and if you don't understand something, you can ask a question, but other than that, you do not speak much during that time. It just once again enhanced and instilled those lessons of, listen and follow, but don't truly listen and internalize on what is going on around you. Next slide, please. In addition to my background and how I grew up, I think is relationships truly determine how my overarching goal is going to be. And one of those biggest relationships is with my fiance, Andrew. We have been together since our freshman year of high school, and we've experienced many different things during this time. For starters, I went off to the academy for 4 years, and that was in Colorado Springs, and we lived in Michigan. He went to school in Minnesota for 2 years during that time, and then went back home to Michigan for 2 years. And I think this is where I really learned the importance and how to communicate effectively with someone else, because during this time we were going through different trials and tribulations and different exciting things at that time that neither one of us didn't really understand from the other person's perspective. So we really had to learn how to talk and listen to the other person so we could really understand what was going on and continue and have a strong relationship. So basically this leads me to what my overarching goal is. And to me, my overarching goal is to just continue to improve upon my listening and communication skills so I can improve all the relationships I have with those around me. Because the better talker and listener that you are, as was pointed out in the Burling Allen textbook, with listening being a forgotten skill, the better listener you are, the better your personal relationships are going to be, the better your work relationships, the better your relationships with your family and your friends. Because if people know that you will truly listen to them, they will feel better about coming to you to talk to you about things, or if they have a problem with you and they know you're really going to listen, they will more than likely sit down and talk to you about it. But if you don't have that good foundation, those relationships will suffer and you will not truly effectively communicate with those around you. So next slide. So some barriers and pollution problems that could occur for me reaching my overarching goal would just be simple. One, it takes time. This is a new skill. There's going to be some bumps along the way. It's not something that I can just learn overnight. There's going to be times when I become emotional, if I'm sad, if I'm angry, if I'm really happy even, where I might revert back to old habits. Because when you get emotional and your adrenaline starts pumping, you don't always use something that you're trying to work on, because it takes more thought to work on new skills than to revert back to old habits. And new habits, once again, are something that are just best learned with practice. And this is a skill that is sometimes hard to practice with others around you if no one around you wants to literally sit down and practice. And since you literally are going to have to explain to someone that we need to sit down and practice, it can take time and just be a little bit harder of a skill to actually practice. I think one of the biggest issues with listening and communicating effectively is it's not something that is taught to us. Throughout school, I was taught how to read, I was taught how to write papers, I was taught how to give a speech effectively, but I wasn't taught how to sit there and listen to others effectively and communicate after listening effectively. And these are different internal and external things that can occur. Internally, when I'm getting upset or angry, it's going to be hard for me to want to stick with, practicing these skills to reach my overarching goals. External factors that can influence this is, if others around you are being really negative or not talking positively, it can be easy to get caught up in that. So if you're at work and you can't avoid it, you can just always try to say something positive. So hopefully, eventually they will just leave you out of those types of conversations and you can continue to listen and talk effectively. And this was even enhanced in a study where they looked at accountants, how accountants are very effective at writing and bookkeeping and keeping their books in order and doing all this stuff on paper. However, when it came to having to do work in the office and communicate with their other associates, they were not that effective because they were never taught interpersonal communication. So they gave all their accounting employees more tips on interpersonal communication, and this led to a much more effective and productive work for all the accountants and people involved. Next solution, please. Slide, please. So the next slide is different solutions that will help me reach my overarching goal. For starters, inhaling and exhaling, as pointed out by Stuart. Basically, inhaling is you listening, while exhaling is you talking. First, you must inhale before you can exhale. So first you must learn to listen before you can talk. And I think one of the next most important things is the talker-listener card from the Peterson book. It basically describes to you what you need to do when you're the talker and when you're the listener. And once again, as I said before, how it could be a barrier, it is also a solution to practice. Since you cannot necessarily always practice with others, you can at least practice in conversations that you have with yourself. It is better than not practicing at all. And of course, last but not least, pray about it. If you're going into a situation where you know you're going to have a very tough conversation, practice what you're going to say and pray about it with God so you can go in with a clear heart and mind with the strength that you need from God. Next slide, please. And as I briefly mentioned, I think one of the biggest keys to my success is going to be to remember this talker listener card and to literally carry it around with me. It's going to need to be something that I look at before I go into a conversation that I know could be an emotional one or a stressful one, just to have that reminder right in my mind, very fresh. Next slide, please. And some actions, as we've been discussing with solutions, because words without actions mean absolutely nothing. So like I said, I need to carry the talker listener card with me, put it in my wallet, have it be part of my daily routine that I at least look at it every morning. Actually practice, like with the internal conversation that I discussed, and to just keep remembering and practicing and talking to others about skills learned, because you can never learn too much about listening and communication. So just I need to continue to read books and practice honing my skills. And another study was done with doctors, occupational therapists, where they looked at, once their interpersonal communication skills were better, how they were more effective with their patients, because the patients felt that they could truly tell them what their problems were and they really listened. So it built a lot better relationships and they had a much better practice with their patients when they became better listeners and communicators. Next slide, please. This is just a picture of the movie Fireproof. I think that this movie showed how deeply important communication is, and how if you are not communicating effectively, that things can go in a downward spiral very quickly. Many of us have our own scenarios in our life where we have seen this happen. However, this movie was just a great example to really see someone else not communicating effectively, and how they were able to change it and build a much healthier relationship because they learned to communicate. Next slide, please. Before I close, I just want to leave you with a few scriptures that I have learned and that have started to already help me in this journey of my overarching goal for better interpersonal communications. So just one up there is that the tongue has the power of life and death. Proverbs 18:21. That's just something that needs to be remembered greatly. What you say can have a huge effect on those around you. Next slide, please. And here are just some last few slides, the last few scriptures that I have used throughout this time with me. And in closing, I just want to thank everyone for listening to my overarching communication goal. For me, this basically has helped me finalize a plan that I'm going to stick with to reach my overarching goal. It's given me something to hold on to for part of my journey that I can now go forward and implement in my life. Next slide, please. And these are just the references that I used for this presentation. Thank you.